Lynn Hiles Ministries presents Dr. Lynn Hiles, that you might have life. And here's your host, Dr. Lynn Hiles.
Welcome back to the program again this week. Thank you for joining us. I know that many of you have been watching for some time, and we're very grateful to have a dedicated group of people that are watching us either through YouTube or through the regular television program, and we're thankful for that. I trust you're being blessed. The responses to this are pretty much popular or favorable, if I could say it like this, which is kind of surprising to me in a way. But I think people are tired of the failed prophecies of the past, and they are at least willing to consider the possibility that there may be another way to look at some of this. And to those who do see this, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it brings such peace and such a joy to your life that at least, share these with your friends and your family, especially people who are gripped with fear, because I think we are really living in a time when the old methods of trying to scare people into salvation is no longer working. And the problem is, if you scare people to get them saved, you got to scare them to keep them saved. And I'm not sure people really came to Jesus or if they just bought a fire insurance policy. So what I want you to do is just kind of, if you'd like, you can take these videos, even from YouTube especially, and share them with your friends or share them on your social media platforms if something particularly speaks to you. We are filming, and we have filmed some time again on this new series titled Revisiting the Book of Revelation. We did a series several years ago on the Book of Revelation. It's also available if you want a more exhaustive one, but this one is just a revisit to the Book of Revelation. It's impossible to cover all the material that's in that. Last week, we dealt with the 10th chapter of the Book of Revelation, and we talked about the mighty angel with a rainbow around his head. And he put one foot on the land, one foot on the sea, and lifted his hand and swore by heaven that there would be no more intervention of time, that there should be any more waiting or delay. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God will be finished, as he hath declared to his servants, the prophets. Now, what we showed you is that at least part of that mystery is, number one, Christ in you, the hope of glory. It is the mystery of the indwelling presence of God, where, the book of Revelation concludes in the last couple chapters by saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. The Message Bible says, look, look, God has moved into the neighborhood. He has made his home in men. That has been God's desire from the time of the disconnect in Eden's misty garden. God has desired, let them build me a house so that I can dwell among them. And so he is about to destroy an old temple in the 11th chapter of Revelation and move into a spiritual house, of whose house we are. And this is kind of the consummation and the conclusion of the old covenant age as they are overlapped. If you remember back some time ago, and I'm not going to review that today, but we showed you how that the circle chart that I used back some time ago showed how that there was an old covenant and then there was a new covenant, and these covenants overlapped each other, almost like a picture of the MasterCard or the MasterCard insignia. That's what it would look like. But where these two ages converge, it was the back end of the old covenant age and the front end of the old covenant age, or the front end of the new covenant age. Hence, it was the ends, plural, of the ages, plural, both the back end of the old covenant, front end of the new covenant. And it's what Paul told the Corinthian church in the first century: you are the people upon whom the ends of the ages have now come. And that transition period was 40 years long, just like the Exodus 40-year wilderness journey. They are coming out through the new covenant, throughout the new, let me say it like this, they are through the New Testament. The apostles and the writers are dealing with people who are coming out of an old covenant and coming into the new covenant. And one covenant is fading away and a new covenant is coming on the scene. Last week, as we talked to you about this mighty angel in the 10th chapter of Revelation, who declares that there would be no more waiting or delay, but in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he begins to sound, the mystery of God would be finished. Now, the mystery, again, was Christ in you, the hope of glory, but it was also, this mystery would be the inclusion of the Gentiles. And so with the destruction of this temple and the final collapse of all the trappings of the old covenant, and the power of the holy people is finally broken according to Daniel 12, which was their exclusive covenant with Yahweh, God has now opened the door to the Gentiles. He hasn't closed the door to the Jews. He simply says to them, there's still only one way into the covenants of promise, and that's through Messiah. And that's the only way all Israel will be saved, is through the Messiah. There is no alternative salvation. There is no other name given under heaven whereby men must be saved, but at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, every tongue will swear. That's why Jesus said to Nicodemus, you must be born again. He's telling Nicodemus, your ethnic background is not enough. Just because you were born Jewish does not automatically include you in this new covenant. God is about to make a new covenant, and you're included because God drew a bigger circle, but he includes both Jew and Gentile. And so even as we look down through this, we'll see, some things that I think are pretty powerful about the inclusion of the Gentiles, and the mystery that has been hid from ages is now really coming to fruition. And you can see down through, even as I shared last week out of Acts 15, they're trying to decide. The house of Cornelius just came in. The Italians are now getting filled with the Holy Spirit. And then they come further down, and all of a sudden, all of these Gentiles are beginning to come in through the ministry of the Apostle Paul, until they have a big Jerusalem council, because a big dissension and a great contention arises among them about what we should do with these Gentiles. And certain came down from Jerusalem and were teaching them that they had to be circumcised and to keep the law of Moses. Go back and read Acts 15. And Paul said he vehemently resisted that. So they came down to Jerusalem, and they were in a big powwow about what we should do. And they finally came to the conclusion that, first of all, these Gentiles were never under the law. So why would we put on them a yoke that they couldn't keep themselves? And they were no longer requiring circumcision, but they were saying that the Gentiles have by faith received the same covenant of promise and received the same gift of the Holy Spirit that they had received. And it was during this 40-year transition period. And then I believe it was James stands up. You can go back and read it, Acts chapter 15. And he says, to this agree the words of the prophets. Of course, Peter, first of all, gets up and shares how that God at the beginning had chosen him to go down to the house of Cornelius, and how God had, extended the door of faith was open to the Gentiles. And so then James finally, their conclusion was that to this agree the words of the prophets. I will return again and restore and build the tabernacle of David that was broken down, so that the residue of men can seek after God. I know we preach a lot about the tabernacle of David being the type of praise and worship, and certainly it's there. But what the bigger picture was that the tabernacle of David was the availability to the presence of God to everyone. And so when he tells him God's going to restore again the tabernacle of David so that the residue of men can seek after him, the mystery is starting to unfold to them. And they're starting to see the inclusion of these Gentiles and how they would, how could we bring these cultures together where you have these people who won't eat anything that was offered to an idol or anything with blood in it. And you got these Gentiles coming in who don't seem to care whether it was offered to an idol or not. It's prime rib to them. And finally, they come to the conclusion, says, okay, if meat's offensive to them, then don't eat. In other words, let's blend together enough to stop looking at stuff that causes us all to fall out over little stuff that doesn't matter. But what I'm after is simply this. He uses the typology of the tabernacle of David, to say, to this agree the words of the prophets. I will return again and build the tabernacle of David. If you look back, the reign of David was 40 years long. And now they are in this transition from 30 AD to 70 AD, same amount of time as the reign of David, except this time the royal seat of David is now seated on the throne. And King Jesus, is now reigning and increasing his kingdom, and the Holy Spirit is filling men and women of God. The kingdom is expanding both to the Jew and to the Gentile, and it is spreading like the leaven of the kingdom, and Jesus is reigning to destroy and defeat every enemy. And you see that as pictured in David's tabernacle, where God says to him, you want to build me a house, but I'm going to build you a dynasty. And he was really prophesying concerning the reign of Messiah, King Jesus, that would come on the scene. And so here is these apostles saying, this is the fulfillment of the prophetic word that I'm going to return and build again the tabernacle of David. But just like in the days of David, there are two temples or two tabernacles still in operation. They are still offering bulls and goats down on one mountain. The priests are baking bread, lighting candles, except there's no ark behind door number 3. But on Mount Zion, there's the tabernacle of David, where the ark has been brought back up, and the celebration, the return of the presence of God is coming back up into the temple of God. So really, it's showing you the overlap and the mixture of the two covenants that were still overlapping each other. Here's what's tragic. We are 2,000 years beyond that time, and we are still trying to mix two covenants. We still have people down on Mount Moriah, where the law is at, and where the old covenant thinking is at. And we have a group on Mount Zion, which is an icon of the new covenant. And it is tragic to me that we are still stuck in that place and should have moved well beyond that into the fullness of what it means to live in the reality of the kingdom right now. Now let's look at this in Revelation 11, because Revelation 11 said, then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood saying, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. If I could get somebody from my team to pull up on this screen, I want to show you, if I can, where this 42 months is at, where we're dealing with this siege of Jerusalem. We've used this timeline many times, and we give credit, of course, to Dr. John Noe for this chart from one of his books titled Unraveling the End. It's a great, great teaching tool, and he's given us permission to use it. We've used it on the program here when we had him on before, but we've dealt with this quite a bit. But, you know, when Jesus gave the prophecy in 30 AD, approximately 30 AD, that this generation would not pass away until everything is fulfilled. Let me get something here to point with. That he gives this prophecy in 30 AD, and exactly, remember this, 40 years, the same amount of time as the wilderness journey, same amount of time as the tabernacle of David, or the David's reign was. From this time until the fulfillment of this is exactly 40 years. But when Jesus prophesied, he said there will be, when you see Jerusalem encompassed with armies, you're going to know that it's near, even the desolation is near, even at the door. These are the days of vengeance, that all things that were spoken might be fulfilled. When they saw Jerusalem encompassed with armies, somewhere around 65 to 66 AD, under the severe persecution of Nero, of the Christians, was taking place during this period of time. Of course, during this period of time, the gospel was being preached to all the world for a witness, and the end would come, which would be AD 70. And for those references that the kingdom would be preached in all the world, you can see Colossians 1, verse 6, and also verse 23, Romans 1 verse 8, Romans 10 verse 18, Romans 16 verse 26, Acts chapter 1 verse 8, Acts chapter 2 verse 5, and Luke 2 verse 1 declares that the gospel had been preached to every creature, and there was no place where their voice was not heard. It was preached to all the known world. But as we're coming to the end of the eschaton, or the biblical last days, which I hope if you're following this, you understand that the biblical last days are not in your future. They are in your past, and it's not the end of the world, it's the end of the age, it's the end of the old covenant. But now we've come to the time when they prophesied in Daniel that when you see the oblation cease, it would be times and a half a time, and that daily sacrifice was abolished in 66 AD, and the amount of time of that great tribulation would be during this period of time, the last 42 months, the last 1,260 days of this prophecy that you see these two witnesses prophesying, and the amount of time that the Gentiles would be able to trod under the foot the holy city. This was during the period of time when the siege began, and now we are in Revelation 11, where you see Jerusalem encompassed with armies. And as you see Revelation 12 open, every person who believed the words of Jesus, when you see Jerusalem encompassed with armies, know that it's near, even at the door. Let him that's in Judea flee to the mountains. Everybody that was in that city, read Revelation 12. They fled and went into the wilderness. And many went to a town called Pella, where they were there for 3.5 years, 42 months, times and a half a time in fulfillment of that. And every believer that saw that. See, even I think about when the Apostle Paul was writing in 1 Thessalonians, I probably need to just leave that be for right now and come back to it. But 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul said, "This we say to you by the word of the Lord," King James says. Every other translation, not every other translation, but other translations say, "This we say to you by the Lord's own words." In other words, what Paul was doing is not giving a prophecy, he's quoting Jesus. "This we say to you by the Lord's own words." Notice the personal pronouns. That we, talking about him and those in the first century, and we which are alive and remain to the coming of the Lord. Well, when did Jesus say that? Well, he said it in Matthew 24, verse 34, when he said, "This generation won't pass." He said it in Matthew 10 when he said, "There's some of you standing here that will not taste death till you see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, coming in his kingdom." And when he says, I think in Matthew 16, when he says, "You will not taste death until you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." This we say to you by the Lord's own words. In other words, these fulfilled prophecies are coming to pass just like Jesus said they would. And Revelation, again, this is the revelation that God gave to Jesus to show his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And we showed you in prior segments how that the book of Revelation is literally the Olivet discourse of Matthew 24 in a much more broader and expanded way. I showed you charts, how everything he prophesied would come to pass exactly, even in the order that Jesus prophesied it. And you can see those things if you go back and look at our YouTube channel and see some of that. But this 42 months was the time when the Gentiles would siege the city, and the court that's without, leave it out and don't measure it. It's been given to the Gentiles. For 42 months, they would trample underfoot the holy city. And let me just go down through here, and he's talking then about the inclusion of the Gentiles coming in, or he's talking about the times of the Gentiles. Now, let me just read some of my notes. I put in my notes, I think it highly possible that the times of the Gentiles could coincide with the text in the book of Romans, chapter 11. The exclusive covenant with the Jews has now been broken, and the power of the holy people has been shattered at the end of this 1,260-day period. The old covenant has been removed. Now both Jew and Gentile can come into the new covenant through the only method by which men can be saved, and that is through the Messiah. The removal of all of these trappings is declaring that the kingdom has now been given to a nation producing the fruit thereof. This does not exclude Jews. It simply declares that there is only one name given under heaven whereby men must be saved, and that is at the name of Jesus. In Romans 11, verse 25 said, "For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own counsels, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in." Now remember, he mentions here, even in Romans 11, verse 25, the mystery. "For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery." Remember Revelation 10, when this angel begins to sound, the mystery is finished. Now let me draw some more timelines from this, because he declares this in Daniel chapter 12 about the amount of time that this would happen. Daniel 12 says, "And at that time shall Michael stand up." Michael is the archangel. Revelation 10, the mighty angel with a rainbow on his head, archangel. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, there's a mighty angel, archangel. 1 Thessalonians chapter 15, the resurrection text, he deals with the last trumpet would be sounded by the archangel. I'm going to put those scriptures together, but I'm showing you they are in the time slot and they fit without manipulation, without any religious calisthenics or twisting the scriptures. They fall within the time slot of what Jesus said would happen. "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." Now that's what Jesus said. There will be great tribulation from this point until the end of 70 AD, which was the 42 months, 1290 days. And he's telling them that the 42 months times and a half a time, that this is the great tribulation that even Daniel prophesied about, a time of great trouble, and that there was not such a nation. Remember Jesus' words? "Then will be great tribulation such as was not since the beginning of the world," or he says in Matthew 24, "would ever be again." So he's telling them that this is this tribulation that Daniel prophesied about. "And many that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." I'm going to deal with the resurrection as we get later into these segments. But he's putting it during this time slot. I'm not, he is. If you put these verses in the times when they are declared to happen, you cannot see it any other way. But he's talking about a resurrection that would take place. And you're going to see, as we get down in chapter 11 here, that when the last trumpet sounds, there's a resurrection. It puts it squarely in the first century. And we're going to see what changed then. But let's look at it. It says, "And many that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise will shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But old Daniel shut up the words and sealed the book even till the time of the end." Now remember, he tells Daniel, seal this book until the time of the end. But he tells them in Revelation 21 and 22, don't seal up the words of this prophecy because the time is at hand. So Daniel was prophesying to the time of the end. Revelation is declaring this is the time of the end, and we are not going to seal up the words of the prophecy of this book. And that's probably why this mighty angel is saying no more time will intervene, that there should be any more waiting or delay. This mystery is about to come to its conclusion. But though Daniel shut up the words, sealed the book, even to the time of the end, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, and there stood other two. I want you to remember that, because I believe these other two, I think it's possible. Let me just say, consider the possibility that these other two are also the two witnesses that are prophesied in Revelation 11. And there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river and the other on that side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long will it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, and he held up his right hand and his left hand, and into heaven and swear by him that lives forever. Now remember, the angel in Revelation does the exact same thing. He lifts up his hand and swears by him who lives forever. That time would be no longer, but here he's saying, he lifted his hand unto heaven and swear by him that lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. The mystery of God will be finished. In other words, that's this period of time right here, this last 3.5 years, this last 42 months, from 66 AD to 70 AD, the power of the holy people was about to be broken, and all of this was about to come to pass during that period of time. And you could just see the connections between this mighty angel. And I heard, but I understood not. Then I said, "Oh, my Lord, what shall the end of these things be?" Or what shall be the end of these things? And he said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." I believe that that verse is quoted almost verbatim in the latter part of Revelation when he said, "Let him that's filthy be filthy still." He wasn't talking about people endlessly being filthy. He was talking about the conclusion of this destruction and those that were filthy. In other words, it was the time is up. You've had every opportunity, Israel, the apostates, to come into this covenant, and you have rejected your Messiah. And he comes on to say, "Many shall be purified, made white, and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly. None of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,305 days. But go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days." This is the time when the daily sacrifice ceased in 66 AD, and this is when all of this stuff began to take place and was fulfilled. The abomination that makes desolate was the entrance of the Gentiles into the holy city and into the temple, which desecrated their city. And when he said, "You saw this, you're going to know that this stuff is very near and it's at hand." These are the fulfillments in Revelation 11 of what Jesus prophesied and what Daniel prophesied and what the prophets. These are the days of vengeance, that all things which were spoken might be fulfilled. Well, we're out of time. If you'd like to sow into this ministry again, please do that by going to my website at lynnhiles.com. There's a place where you can give through our PayPal portal. You can give via credit card, debit card, MasterCard. You can give also by sending a check or money order to the address that will come on the screen to Lynn Hiles Ministries. And you can call the number that will come on the screen, and someone will take your call. You can give through that method. God bless you. Thank you for joining us this week.
For anyone struggling to understand John's writings in Revelation, this book provides true, biblically based answers. Through detailed insights into the letters John wrote to the 7 churches of his day, you will learn how to avoid the mistakes of the early church to overcome today's trials and tribulations. This book will provoke you to thought and dialogue, bringing greater clarity and revelation of Jesus Christ.